All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Interview with Ease. As you probably have guessed, today's workshop is all about interviewing, and more importantly, how to interview with ease and confidence. So, I'm really hoping that by the end of this workshop, you walk away with some helpful ways to prepare for an interview, as well as some ways to elevate your responses to the most commonly asked interview questions. So that way, when you do get an offer for an interview down the line, or maybe some of you are already having some interviews being lined up that you have scheduled in the future, you can walk into those interviews feeling more confident and knowing that you're going to do an awesome job. So my name is Erin Ahart. I am one of the career counselors here for the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences in Career Services, situated within the Office of Graduate Studies. So I will be leading today's session. Keep in mind that today's workshop is part of our Career Readiness Workshop series. So there are more of these workshops coming on all kinds of different career development topics. Last week, we kicked it off. My colleague, Dr. Johnette Ruffner-Caesar, led our very first workshop as part of the series, and that was entitled Career Readiness Orientation, Foundations for Career Success. And Dr. Ruffner-Caesar in that workshop shared a ton of different resources. And the purpose of that session was really just to share everything that you have available to you as graduate students in the College of Arts and Sciences. And so if you're interested in watching that recording so you can kind of get up to speed in this workshop series, please feel free to reach out to either of us. You'll see our emails in just a second, and we can send you that recording too. Okay. So to share a little bit more about myself, again, my name is Erin Ahart. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the career counselors within the College of Arts and Sciences. So I've worn a variety of hats in career services throughout my career, but what I really love most is helping students in one-on-one counseling sessions. And I really love helping people figure out what they want to do with their career and then helping them get there. But one of the reasons why I absolutely love talking about interviewing is because, like many people, I have had an interview fail. And so what that means is my very first interview for a full-time role right out of getting my undergraduate degree at Penn State. It was an interview for my dream job. And I felt like everything had led up to that moment because I actually secured the interview because of a conversation I had with someone at that company 1 year prior to the interview. So I was really excited. I was so nervous. And unfortunately, in that interview, I really let my interview anxiety and stress get the best of me. And so it didn't turn out the way I had hoped. I did not get the position, but I learned some really awesome lessons from that experience, which I'm really excited to share with you all today. And I've had some great interviews too, so I'll share, what made those successful as well. One final piece about me is that I am a Gallup certified Clifton Strengths coach. So one thing that you'll hear me say throughout this workshop is that knowing your strengths and your natural talents and really everything that you have to offer is such an important part of interviewing because you want to share what's so special about you, right? And so if you have the chance to take the Clifton Strengths assessment and you want to kind of talk through your results and talk about what makes you stand out, I would absolutely love to do that with you. So please feel free to reach out to me. And it looks like we have a couple more people, so I'm going to let them in. All right, so we'll let a couple more folks join us. But finally, you have access to both me and my colleague, Dr. Johnette Ruffner-Caesar. So both of us, we make up the dynamic duo in the CCIS Graduate Career Services here. And so you can meet with either of us for an individual career counseling appointment. Dr. Ruffner-Caesar is not here today, but I can tell you that she is absolutely wonderful. And you can feel free to schedule an appointment with either of us on Handshake to talk about anything career related. Okay. And before I get into more specific tips, I do want to share some of GW's awesome interview resources. So you all are graduate students within the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences, and you have access to our services. We also have the main Career Services Center here at GW. Now, the main center mainly serves undergrad students, but they do have some awesome resources on their website that anyone can use. And so one of those is accessible via this link on the screen, careerservices.gwu.edu/interviewing. And then once you go to that website, take a look at those tips there. One of the resources you'll find is GW Interview Prep. And what GW Interview Prep is basically it's an opportunity to record your answers to practice interview questions, which are then reviewed by AI or a robot or whatever you want to call that. And so they'll really help you to figure out, are you making eye contact? Are you looking at the webcam? Are you using a lot of filler words? And that could be a really helpful way to practice on your own. But my favorite interview resource that we offer here is the opportunity to schedule a mock interview with myself or Dr. Ruffner Caesar. And that's probably the best way to prepare because it really puts you in the same environment that you would be in for your actual interview. And you can also email us anything about the organization or the job description ahead of time, so that way we can prepare and really ask you specific questions that you'll likely be asked in your upcoming interview that are industry specific. So as I mentioned, if I do one thing in this workshop, I just want you to walk away knowing that you do have the ability to interview successfully and interview with confidence. But some other things that you'll learn, you've already gained some helpful GW resources, but we're going to go over some preparation strategies as well. I'm also going to explain the difference in how you would prepare for a virtual interview versus an in-person interview. And then I'm also going to teach you all how to answer the most commonly asked interview questions, such as what are your strengths and weaknesses? Tell me about yourself. Why should we hire you? Etc. And I'm really excited for that part. But shall we get into it? Preparing for your interview. So the kind of interview that we'll be talking about today is a behavioral interview. And so what that means, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is interviewers in this kind of interview are going to be questioning candidates about their past experience in order to predict how a candidate will operate in the future at their company. And behavioral interviews are the most common kind of interview across the board. So it's most likely that you will be asked to reflect on past experiences. You'll hear me say, and especially if you work with me one-on-one, that past performance predicts future success. So that's really what they're trying to get at here. I also want you to keep in mind that you are interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So the interview is a great opportunity to be very observant and keep track of how you were treated by the interviewer. How did they answer your questions that you had for them? What did you like and what did you not like about what they shared about the position and the organization? And so the purpose of an interview is really to identify whether you and the company are a good fit for each other. So it really goes both ways. And my colleague, Dr. Ruffner Caesar, also shares that she views the interview as a partnership meeting. So that's another way to view it more as a conversation. Yes, it's a formal conversation, but it's just as important for you to get a feel for what they have to offer you as well. So in the spirit of identifying fit, it is your responsibility to know the position and the company that you are interviewing for. So you want to research the organization and the people who work there. You should always, always, always know the mission and values of the organization. You will probably be asked about how you resonated with the mission and values in your interview. This information can usually be found on the organization's website in the About section. It should also be visible on any social media pages that they have, maybe on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. And you also want to try and figure out who might be a part of your team and what departments exist within the organization. If you're lucky, the people who work there will be listed on the website as part of an employee directory, but this isn't always the case. So I would invite you to do some perusing on LinkedIn to find out who might be a part of your team. One word of caution though, you don't want to request to connect with anyone who could be a part of your interview or could be a part of the hiring process. It's actually a best practice for them not to accept your request to connect with them on LinkedIn because they don't want to show any preferential treatment before they've chosen a candidate. It also helps to know who will be present at your interview. In the past, I have simply emailed the hiring manager or whoever I've been communicating with for my interview and just simply said, may I ask who will be present at my interview? It's as simple as that. And so that will really help you when you're doing your research too. Next, you want to know the job description really well, and you want to know your resume inside and out. You want to know the job description mostly so you can use that information to connect your experience back to what you know they're looking for. And then you want to know your resume because everything on your resume is fair game for them to ask you about in an interview, down to your bullet points, line by line. And so you really want to know this like the back of your hand. And finally, again, you want to connect how your experience matches what they're looking for, and then how your interests and values align with the organization. So a suggestion that I have and an exercise that I've actually done to prepare for interviews before is to print my resume and take out a highlighter. This activity really just helps me to stay focused, make sure that I'm demonstrating fit, and make sure that I mention really everything that I want to mention in my interview. So the way you would do this is you'd have your copy of your resume, right? I want you to star, underline, or highlight 5 skills and or experiences that you want to share by the end of your interview so you feel confident that you've touched on everything that you wanted to share with the committee. These are skills and experiences that should be relevant to the position. Somewhere on your resume, maybe in the margins or at the bottom where you have extra white space, you also want to write down 3 things. They can be a mix, so anything about the company, the job description, anything that resonated with you about them. And then I want you to comment on these during the interview. This is a great way to make sure that you talk about yourself and talk about what really draws you to the position and the company. In the first bullet point, I say you can keep your resume next to you, whether your interview is in person or virtual. One thing to keep in mind, though, is if you do this activity and you mark up your resume, you don't want to bring the marked up copy of your resume to your in-person interview. So you want to do this activity to prepare beforehand, but you want to make sure you're bringing a clean copy just because it's a little more professional. For a virtual interview, they won't see your resume next to you, so you can feel free to use that marked up copy and glance at it whenever you just need to check in and make sure that you have mentioned what you want to mention. But you don't want to get in the habit of looking down because they will notice. It's really just more of a safety net and a great preparation tool. All right, so now let's talk about the difference between virtual and in-person interviews. So for virtual, in both, you want to, of course, you want to make sure you're making eye contact. But for a virtual interview, this means looking at the webcam when you're speaking. So I'll do a little demonstration. So right now I am looking at where all of your faces would be on the screen, but it doesn't look like I'm looking at you right now. But now I move my eyes to the webcam. Can someone give me a thumbs up if it feels more like I'm making eye contact with you right now? Yes. Erin says yes. Okay. Great. So that's why you want to look at the webcam. I know someone mentioned that it can be difficult to keep that eye contact, and sometimes you can find yourself staring off into the distance. Something that another career coach told me that they've done is they take one of those smaller rectangular sticky notes. You can get them at Staples, and then draw an arrow and put that sticky note right next to your camera on your laptop. And so that will remind you to bring your eyes back to the webcam. Interviewers know that looking at the webcam is not everyone's strength. So don't worry if, this it's not your best skill. But I think that, having that reminder could be really helpful. And I am going to provide one more tip to prepare after I talk about the rest of the things on this slide. So for virtual and for in-person, you're dressing business casual. So you're dressing up for the interview and really putting your best foot forward when it comes to your physical appearance. For virtual, of course, you can wear jeans. You just want to make sure that it's visible from the waist up or anywhere they can see you. But I do find that dressing in your full outfit, your in full professional attire, just makes it feel more like a formal event. And you should take the virtual interview as seriously as you would for an in-person interview. You want to make sure that you check your Wi-Fi connectivity. I recently noticed that, so I live in an area where there are lots of people surrounding me in my building. I noticed that when people get home from work at the end of the day, my Wi-Fi is significantly worse after 5 p.m. So you just want to test it maybe the day before at the time when your interview is scheduled, if that's an option for you, and make sure that your Wi-Fi is working right. You can even reserve a space at GW on our campus that will be a private space if you know that this might be a problem. You also want to download the latest version of the interview video platform. So whether it's on WebEx, Zoom, Google Meet, any of those, you want to make sure that you download this at least an hour before your interview. And I would suggest even way longer than that. What you don't want to happen is to open it 10 minutes before your interview starts and realize there's something additional that you need to install. So you want to make sure you're all set on that front. You want a clean, professional looking background. Right now I have a GW branded background, but it does have some cherry blossoms behind me. I would recommend something a little less busy than this, maybe just a plain GW background. If you're in your home and you don't want to use a Zoom background, a plain wall or just anything that's not going to be distracting. So that brings me to my next point. You don't want any roommates, neighbors, or pets walking behind you. If you're worried about noise from your neighbors, I would recommend letting them know beforehand if you have that relationship with them, or putting a sign on your door that says interview in progress, and then you can take it right down after your interview is over. So I know I said I was going to mention one more tip about, making eye contact, preparing for that virtual environment. So one thing that I have done to practice for virtual interviews and to practice for presentations is to open up a Zoom room just with myself to practice. This is very similar to practicing in a mirror, which I'm sure you've heard before, but I like to practice in my very own Zoom room because it allows me to practice looking at the webcam. And it is known by psychologists that practicing for a nerve-wracking event in the same environment before that event comes along will calm you down more than it would have otherwise when it comes to that nerve-wracking event. So when you put yourself in the same environment, it helps you to know that, oh, actually, I've done this before. I've practiced in this setting. The only thing that's different is that, now there are people here and I'm trying to impress them. But really practicing in that Zoom environment before your Zoom interview, I think will be extremely helpful. And it definitely helps calm me down, at least with the virtual aspect. Now, for in-person interviews, business casual really does apply to your full appearance. And it also includes personal hygiene. So you want to make sure you wake up, brush your teeth, you're smelling good. Don't spray too much perfume or cologne because you don't want to overdo it, but just something in the middle. When making eye contact, of course, now you're actually looking at a person. But if there are multiple interviewers, you want to make sure that you're giving attention to everyone in the room. Oftentimes there will be one person who kind of takes charge of the interview. They're asking you all of the questions. but everyone else is taking time out of their day to be there for you as well. So you want to make sure you're connecting with each of them by making eye contact with them. Additional recommendations. I highly recommend that you bring printed copies of your resume for your interviewers. This is not something that is required or that is typically recommended, but I really love this because it shows them that you were considering them in the interview setting. So usually your interviewer will print out your resume to have next to them as they're interviewing you, but when you do it for them, and you don't need to let them know you're doing this in advance. But if you do it for them and you just bring it, it's a really nice, considerate extra touch. When you bring printed resumes for your interviewer, you'll likely have them in a black folder or a leather padfolio. If you don't have a padfolio, basically what it is, it's just a black leather folder, but it has a notebook inside of it, another area for you to slip in your resumes, maybe a place for a pen. I think they're $15 on Amazon if that's something you want. It's not necessary or required, but just an extra way to elevate your professional look. I mentioned that padfolios often come with a little scratch pad. So you definitely want to bring a notebook of some kind to your interview. One, because you will learn throughout this presentation that you should come with questions to ask them and you want to have them written down so you remember what they are. But if they give you any important information about the company, which they likely will, you want to be able to write down this information to remember it later and signal to them that you're listening and that you're invested by writing it down. All right, we're getting into the last little piece of how to prepare for an interview. So, things you can do to mentally prepare, which in my opinion is the most important part, but it's also the thing that's hardest to do, especially for people like me who get nervous in interview situations. Things you can do to mentally prepare are practice with a trusted mentor or coach. And so this could be in the form of a mock interview with either me or Dr. Johnette Ruffner Caesar. Again, putting you in that environment to help you visualize and know what to expect of the interview. Also, utilizing family and friends is a really great way to prepare because when you practice answering those interview questions with family and friends, they know more about you than other people would. And so they might say, oh, I'm surprised you didn't bring up XYZ experience because I think that's one of the most impressive things that you offer. So they can be a really great resource. Something that I like to do is I like to make a playlist depending on my mood. You know, sometimes I need one that calms me down. Sometimes I need one that really, energizes me and pumps me up. That playlist has a lot of Dua Lipa on it, some Taylor Swift. And I recommend that you listen to this when you practice and again before your interview on the day of. Again, you're putting yourself in the same environment and letting your body and your mind know that you have done this before, and so you are going to do a great job. I also, something I do is I reward myself with something to look forward to afterwards. So earlier I mentioned that I had a not so great interview experience, but what I had rewarded myself with was a pint of Ben and Jerry's in my freezer. So if I had done an amazing job, that would have been there to reward myself with. But since I was sad after that interview, it was there to comfort me. And so you're going to give yourself this reward no matter what happens. A couple other things that people swear by are calling a family member or best friend to hype you up before the interview. Some students have told me that drinking Gatorade really helps because of the electrolytes and energizing them for some reason. I don't know, whatever works for you. Practicing in the mirror and dancing in the mirror or posing or smiling in the mirror beforehand. Those are all great things that will make you feel a little more confident. And then finally, just remember that it is always okay to pause, even in the middle of an interview, and take a deep breath. If they ask you a question, you can always say, That's a fantastic question. Can I just have a minute to collect my thoughts? You can also say, can I have a minute to think of the best example to give you? That's a great one. And also know that everyone has been nervous for an interview at some point. And if they say they haven't, they're lying. I've already told you that I have been so nervous for interviews before, and I'm a career counselor, and this is something that I provide advice on. So everybody has been nervous. And also know that you're really trying to find if you are the right fit for a company. And so the right company will instantly recognize the amazing qualities that you have and say, this is our candidate. So just know that you possess unique qualities that the right company will value. Okay, before we get into answering common interview questions, I just want to take a minute to check in. Does anyone have any questions about how to prepare? All right, I don't see any questions. And just a reminder for those of you who weren't able to make it at noon, this is being recorded, so you all have access to the preparation portion of this session later. So not to worry if you missed anything. And you can also feel free to type any questions in the chat at any time. And one final check-in. Can everyone still see my screen and hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. Yes. All right. I see some thumbs up. That's great. Okay. So moving on, we will now talk about how to answer commonly asked interview questions, my favorite part of the presentation. So the first question that you will always be asked is either to introduce yourself and your professional background, or they will simply phrase it as, tell me about yourself. So this is your chance to make a great first impression. It is tell me about you. So your answer should be extremely unique and extremely tailored to your own experience. You want to give the interviewer an idea of what you have to offer. You want to come across as competent, a great communicator, and knowledgeable about yourself and why this position makes sense for you. However, I know that sometimes the first question to answer is the hardest because that's when you just joined the interview, your heart might be pounding a little bit, you're nervous, you're just getting to know everyone. And so one thing that I recommend you do is simply to smile. And you can do this with every question, just to kind of set yourself up to start your answer. When asked to tell me about yourself, take a deep breath and smile, and then you can go into it. You also want to adjust to the natural flow of conversation, and here's why. Interview questions can be asked in a variety of different ways, even though they're often getting at the same thing. For this one, sometimes you'll go into the interview, whether it's virtual or in person, and it will be very clear that it's extremely formal and they aren't going to have any small talk with you. They're just going to get started on the questions. And so if that's the case, you want to be prepared for that and be prepared for tell yourself to be the very first formal question they ask. Other times, and I find that this is more common, especially now that we're post-COVID, what's more common is when you'll get into the Zoom room or in person, people will shake your hand, people will greet you, and their team will go around and introduce themselves and then ask you to introduce yourself as well. And so that is what I would expect. And that's going to be a little more casual. But no matter how casual that may appear to you, you want to make sure that your answer is the same for both. And you want to give a complete answer for both. And again, just be thinking, what do I want to present to the interviewer as part of my first impression? Now, I am a person who really likes bullet points and to know exactly what I need to hit on. So I'm going to teach you how to answer this question following the present, past, future model. This is just one way to answer this question. It is not the end all be all, but I find it really helpful for people who like to keep their answers organized for this question. So the present, past, future model is where you introduce yourself. So say, hello, my name is Erin Ahart, for example. Give an overview of your current professional role or roles, your professional history or background, and where you'd like to go in the future. So when describing your current roles, remember that this includes your role as a student, any research or professional organizations you're involved in, any work you're doing, whether it's paid or unpaid. And professional roles can mean a lot of different things. So if you're not sure what to talk about, ask a career coach and they can help you narrow it down. When detailing your professional history, this can include where you got your training, where you received your degrees, why you chose the profession. And in general, this section is really just about telling the interviewer how you got to where you are today. You can even tell a story about something that really inspired you to choose your career. And then finally, you want to talk about your future goals. So this can include your current interests or niche within the field. Any areas where you'd like to grow, a short or long-term career goal. But if you really want to impress them, you want to talk about how this position fits into your goals. So you really want to express interest in the position and the organization. And again, there are many ways to answer this question. This is just one approach, but no matter how you answer it, again, give an overview of who you are, what you have to offer, and why this position makes sense for you. And we are going to go over an example because I think that will be helpful. So as I read this example, just on your own, try to pinpoint where this person talks about the present, past, and future, and how she connects the position back to her goals. And this example is actually taken from someone who's in my professional network. Okay. So hello, my name is Sarah Castle, and I'm currently pursuing a Master of Arts in Anthropology at the George Washington University. I also work part-time for an archaeological resource management firm as an administrative assistant. I've always been fascinated by human history and inherited this love from my aunt, who was a middle school history teacher. Growing up, I would talk with her for hours about ancient civilizations and specifically the tribes native to my home in Connecticut. Through speaking with the field technicians in my current position and through writing my master's thesis on 18th and 19th century Eastern Pequot households, my passion for anthropology and specifically archaeology has only gotten deeper. And this is why I'm so interested in the archaeological field technician position at Tetra Tech, where I will directly participate in surveying and excavation and ultimately help to preserve artifacts that we identify. Again, I'm excited about this opportunity and look forward to sharing more about why I believe I am a great fit throughout our conversation today. So, does anyone have any questions about tell me about yourself or anything that we've talked about so far? All right, I'm not seeing any hands, so I will keep going. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So now we're going to get into why are you interested in this position? For this one, you really just want to make sure that you are staying true to yourself. So I recommend before even applying to a job, checking in with yourself and making sure that the position truly aligns with your goals. If you really want the job, answering this question should be easy. So you want to answer it honestly, as employers can tell if you're being genuine or not. You also want to mention specifics about why you're interested. So if I were you, and if you've done that highlighter activity that we talked about earlier, I would refer back to the 3 things you wrote down on your resume if you completed it, if you completed the activity. And again, things that you can mention from either the job description or the website are a shared mission, purpose, or values, talented colleagues who you can learn from and work alongside, any aspects of the company culture. Maybe they have a really diverse workforce that you really love about the organization. And you can even explicitly say, In the job description, I noticed XYZ. Or while researching your organization's website, I was excited to learn that you value XYZ. But here's what you don't want to say. You don't want to say, well, I just need a job, or I want to make X amount of money, or I really don't like my current employer, so I'm just trying to get out of there. Don't say any of those things. And I always recommend not mentioning your previous employer at all if you can manage that, because what are they asking you, right? They're asking, why are you interested in this position? So they want to know why you want to work for them. And that comes back to my third bullet point on the screen here. You want to make them feel special, and you don't want to be generic. I know that some of you may be wondering, well, I already talked about why I was interested in the position and the tell me about yourself question. So what do I do if I've already said that, right? One thing you can say is similar to what I mentioned in my introduction. I'm really interested in this position and you're working for your organization because of XYZ. To expand on that even more, and then you can go into and maybe dig a little bit deeper into why you're so interested. Okay. And now for another extremely common question that you will get. It can be phrased, two ways. So where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? And what are your short and long-term goals? So the reason why employers ask this is because they want to know if you have a vision for yourself and they want to know what motivates you. They also want to know how the position and the company fits into your goals. But regardless of how this question is phrased, I find it helpful to answer your answer into 3 parts. So for the first part, you want to answer their question about your short-term goals or your 5-year goals, right? So in other words, tell them what you are hoping to learn or accomplish, what skills you're hoping to develop. And then the second thing you want to talk about is your long-term goals or your 10-year plan. And this could be a dream job or a general idea of your desired career path. But I know that not all of you have it figured out, and some of you don't know what your dream job is, and that is totally fine. I don't even know what my dream job is. I don't think anyone really does. So something that you can always say is something like this. In 5 to 10 years, I hope to have grown within a company that shares my values, such as XYZ. And hopefully, I will have had the chance to work within a tight-knit team that supports my desire to grow in my career. So even though this is extremely vague, and if you have a specific career goal, you do want to mention that, this answer, at least you're still sharing that you have a goal of staying at one company for at least a little while, and that you value a supportive team. And both of those things are great attributes that you want to share. Finally, you want to tell them how the position fits into your goals. So all you have to say to lead into this is, I know that this position will help me achieve my goals because of XYZ. And that's how you answer that portion. Does anyone have any questions about where do you see yourself in 5 years, or why are you interested in this position? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so we will move right along. All right, so the next question, many of you have heard of, it's one of the most infamous interview questions of all time, is what are your strengths and weaknesses? So it's really not that difficult to answer, and I think you'll feel so much better after hearing this information. For strengths, and actually before we get into that, if they're asking you about your strengths and your weaknesses, make sure that you give at least 2 for each, because it shows that you're listening when you provide 2 answers, because it's plural, right? They're asking you for multiple. But okay, so getting back to strengths, it doesn't really matter what strengths you list, as long as you give examples, because what you don't want is to rattle off a bunch of different buzzwords. I'm a good communicator, I'm a team player, I'm hardworking. Anyone can say any of those things, but how are they going to believe you if you don't provide examples and back up what you've said, right? So that's the most important thing. You also want to describe how you might use your strengths in a future role. So they can again start to envision how you would operate at their company. For weaknesses, it also really doesn't matter what you say for your weaknesses, but you want to show on how you're working to improve them. That is the most important thing. Interviewers know that everyone has weaknesses. We just don't share them very often. So the reason why they're asking you what your weaknesses are is because they know that what's more important is how you manage them and how you work on them. And so that's why they're asking. I shared that, it doesn't really matter what your weaknesses are. That is true. I would say just, one to stay away from is saying, I'm lazy or I don't show up on time. You do want to be strategic with what you disclose, but for the most part, it's not that big of a deal. I have a Clifton Strengths icon on here because part of what I do as a Clifton Strengths coach is I work with people on how to manage their weaknesses and try and combat their weaknesses by tapping into some of their greatest strengths. So if you're interested in that, knowing more about your Clifton Strengths is a great way to get even better at answering this question. But I do have some examples for you. So as I'm reading this example of, please describe one of your greatest strengths, think about where the interviewee gives examples and how they connect it to the new role that they're interviewing for. So I'll go ahead and read this one. One of my greatest strengths is communication. In my current role as a teaching assistant, I'm able to demonstrate this when helping students learn the course material in one-on-one meetings with me. I make sure that I'm clearly explaining the material as if I were learning it myself for the very first time, and I work with the students until they understand. Because of the way I communicate this knowledge, several students have actually shared with me that I helped improve their understanding of the material, which also makes me feel like I'm making a difference. My communication skills will help me in this new role when providing context and direction to people on my team. All right. And now we'll give an example for weaknesses. And as I read this example, think about where this person talks about how they're working to improve their weakness. One of my weaknesses is that I have trouble focusing when working independently for long periods of time. Over the years, I've developed strategies to combat this, such as listening to music while I work and working on different tasks throughout the day, instead of working on one project for the entire day. Sometimes I know that this is not an option, so that's when I tap into my sense of responsibility to be a high-performing team member. I always want to do my part, which really motivates me to stay focused. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments about those examples or how to answer what are your strengths and weaknesses? Okay. And now we will talk about how to answer the hallmark question of the behavioral interview, which is, tell me about a time when. This is where they're asking, really how you've handled past situations. Again, so they can start to envision how you would operate within their company and how you will behave. Some questions that you might get, tell me about a time when you failed. Tell me about your greatest accomplishment. Tell me about a time you worked in a team and the role you played. The example that I'll provide in just a minute is, tell me about a time when you took initiative. So those are just a couple examples. But even though, this is a question, there are a lot of versions, ways it can be asked, there is a bulleted method for answering the question, and that is the STAR method. So usually it's only STAR, but I've added another R to the end. And this is advice that another career counselor gave me in the past, but I think it's really important. And so I'll go through what each one of these means. So when answering a question and reflecting on the past, you want to start by describing the situation. So you want to paint a picture of what happened and what you were dealing with in the role. Then you want to talk about the task. So what was your role in the situation and what did you have to do? For action, then you want to talk about what you actually did and how you did it, and maybe you can even throw in why you did it. The first R is result. So what was the outcome of the action that you took? And then the second R is reflection. And in my opinion, this is the most important one. You want to talk about what you learned from the experience and how you can apply what you learned to future roles, specifically at the company you're interviewing for. But I do have a way to simplify that because for people who get nervous or for people who forget, some of those more structured ways to answer questions, there's something that's way simpler that you can do to make sure that you're hitting on all the points you need to hit on. So if you don't want to follow the STAR method, all you have to do is say what happened, what you did, and what you learned. So again, that's what happened, what you did, and what you learned. So in this next example, I'll read this. I want you to think about how the person stated what happened, what they did, and what they learned. A time when I took initiative was when I was asked to be the music director for a musical in my undergraduate institution's largest student-run musical theater group. I knew that on top of teaching the vocalists and musicians the music, I would have to conduct the pit orchestra, which I had never done before. So I took initiative by reaching out to music students and professors in the School of Music to learn the basics of conducting. After lots of practice, I conducted the musical and our show won an award for Best Show of the Spring Season. Through this process, I learned the benefit of seeking guidance from seasoned professionals and that I can learn a new skill without having received formal training. I'm excited to work with the talented professionals within your organization and learn from their experience too. So I like this example. It's actually an answer that I have given myself in a past interview. Some of this is taken from my own experience. And one tip is that your answers to interview questions do not just need to come from paid experiences that you've had. Instead, when you think of examples to provide, you want to think to yourself, what example from all of my experience best demonstrates what they're asking? So volunteer and leadership experience are often some of the best experiences to draw from when answering questions about the past, because they tell a little bit more about you and your story sometimes. And you want to show the interviewer all that you can about yourself, all while still keeping it professional. Okay, and so we're now getting down to some of the last couple questions. But one that you will likely be asked at the end of an interview is, why should we hire you? So this is really your final chance to wrap up your experience in a bow. And you must know this like the back of your hand, because if you don't know why they should hire you, then how will they know, right? So some things to think about. What 3 things do you want them to remember about you? What sets you apart from other candidates? Is there anything that you didn't get the chance to share? So again, let's say you did that highlighter activity. There's 5 things starred on your resume and you only shared 4 of them. This is the time where you can say, and by the way, I also have this to offer that I didn't get to share yet. And again, it's your last chance to leave a great impression. And then one of the last things they'll ask you is, what questions do you have for us? And so again, I mentioned bringing a Padfolio or a notebook or folder. You always want to come prepared with 3 to 5 questions written down. They might answer some of the questions that you were thinking of asking throughout the interview. So that's why you want to have a couple extras. I find that asking 3 to 4 questions is usually the sweet spot. But when thinking about questions to ask, first you want to scan the job description and make sure you're not asking anything that you should already know. And as a general rule of thumb, you don't want to ask about salary until you're offered the position or until they bring it up. So you do want to negotiate once you have a formal offer. One exception to this, if there's no salary range listed on the website, you don't want to waste their time and they don't want to waste yours. So it is okay to ask about the general range, but stick to asking about the general range. Some examples you'll see on the screen. These are really common. So, what do you enjoy the most about working here? What are the next steps in the hiring process? How would you describe the company culture? And what is the hybrid or in-person work schedule? But overall, there are just a couple more things that I want you to keep in mind when interviewing. Tailoring your answers to the specific company and the specific position has never been more important. And the reason why is because today's workforce is known for leaving a company for another position after sometimes just 1 to 2 years. And employers spend tons of money finding and keeping the right talent and making sure the people they hire are a fit for them. And the more you tailor your answers to a role, the more interested you appear, and the more employers believe you will be likely to stick around, which is what they want, and that's ultimately what you want. I also want you to remember that employers desperately want you to be right for the role. They don't want to reject you. They want to be done with the hiring process and they want to find a great candidate that they can go ahead and move forward with. And so just be knowing that they want you to be successful when you have an interview. Another reason to walk in feeling confident. And then one more thing, do not forget to send a thank you note within 24 hours of your interview. The reason why is because sometimes this is a final test. So employers are waiting for you to send a thank you note to know if you're really serious about the job. Someone asked me when I presented on this yesterday, if I forgot to send a thank you note, does that exclude me from the hiring process going forward? And no, they're not going to throw you out of being considered, but it definitely is something that they take into consideration when choosing a candidate. Yeah, and then one more tip, you'll see that there are some icons on here. We've got the Muse, Indeed, LinkedIn, the Balance Money. These are all reliable sources when you are investigating and looking up, how to navigate this in an interview or how to answer this question. And the Muse actually has a great article on how to send a thank you note and what to include in your email. And so when I email everyone the recording of this session afterwards, I will include the link to that article. And then finally, here's just what I've learned. You all already know that I take a lot of experience from my bad interview that I had, but I've also had some great ones too. And what I've learned is that interviewing is a muscle. So the more you use it, the more natural it will feel. And that's also why you don't want to interview for your dream job first if you can help it. That's why I recommend scheduling a mock interview with myself or with Dr. Ruffner Caesar or practicing with a family member or a friend. What would be the best case scenario is if you could also set up an interview with another company. Maybe it's one that you're not as passionate about or you're not excited about. So that way you have had a real interview experience before you get an interview for that job you're really, really looking forward to. And you never know, you can interview with someone and then they might blow you out of the water and you might think, oh, I actually want to work at this company more now. I also want you to remember that no job is perfect. So don't be discouraged if your first choice doesn't work out. You only know so little about a company from an interview. You've met with them for 1 hour, or if you have multiple interviews, maybe you've met with them for 2 or 3 hours. And you can only learn so much from that time. And so that's why you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket, is because you truly don't know what it will be like working for a company until you get there. It's also not personal if an interviewer asks you a question you feel you've already answered. So for equity purposes, a lot of interviewers are required to avoid small talk and they will ask the same questions to every candidate. And that's actually a great sign because you want there to be an equitable interview process, right? But for example, if you talk all about why you're interested in the role and the tell me about yourself question, and then they say, so why are you interested in this position? You feel you've already answered it. It's probably not because they want to know more. It's probably because they have to ask you that, just like they have to ask every other candidate that question. And finally, if something happens with your Zoom or your virtual interview, people are really understanding and it's okay. So, everyone has dealt with online interviewing, online meetings because of COVID, and that's a benefit that helps you because, everyone understands. And finally, you want to consider working with a career counselor to identify what makes you stand out so you can feel confident in what you have to offer. And I have this quote on the screen that I'll end with today. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. Everything can be a learning experience. I know not everyone believes that everything happens for a reason, but you can learn something from every experience that you have. And so when you make a mistake or when you don't get the role that you wanted, I want you to ask yourself, am I going to be the person who failed? Or am I going to be the person who lets this experience drive me to be better and learn something about myself? And the choice is up to you. And so that concludes our presentation. Thank you again for joining me. I know that some people had a couple things they wanted to learn that I might not have hit on, like body language and filler words. So I will stay on to talk about those things. And I also just want to know, did you find this helpful? And if you feel comfortable, I'd love to know, one thing that you found particularly interesting or a tip that you want to use in the future. You can feel free to unmute yourself or drop that in the chat. And if you have any questions, I'm also here. No questions quite yet. So I'm going to talk about body language and filler words. I know this was something that someone was interested in learning about. So right now I'm sitting in a swivel chair, right? And I like to use my hands when I talk. So you might have seen that when I was presenting today. In an interview, if that's, who you are and that's how you do things, that's okay. But the reason why you do want to be more stationary is because you just don't want to be a distraction. You don't want to be distracting from all the great things that you're telling them. And so I would recommend not using a swivel chair. I would recommend using a stationary chair so you physically can't move. Any anxiety or, bodily energy that you need to get out that might come out in your hands, try and focus that in your legs where they can't see them. So maybe you're someone who needs to cross your legs or, fidget with your feet. And this is, again, we're talking about virtual interviews right now. That's something that you could do. Have a stress ball there next to you. For filler words, a way to practice is when you're practicing in the mirror, whenever you feel yourself saying a filler word, you can just say the word stop instead. And then eventually that will be something that you say to yourself in your mind. So you stop saying that filler word. I know we only have 2 people left in the Zoom room, so I just want to check in again. Does anyone have questions? Okay, no questions from Erin. What about you, Kendall? Thank you so much for joining. I'm glad some people found it helpful. All right, awesome. Well, have a good day.